The most effective communicators in the world all structure their messages the same way by designing it for simplicity. But the problem is, simple is hard work. Let's have ourselves a pocket sized pep talk because our brains are programmed to complicate things. It takes deliberate, intentional effort to communicate in a way that seems effortless. Stay tuned. We're going to talk about how.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jolles.
Today's guest, Ben Gutman, is a marketing and communication expert and author of Simply Put, Why Clear Messages Win and How to Design Them. He's an experienced marketing executive and educator on a mission to get leaders to more effectively connect by simplifying their message. Ben's a former co-founder and managing partner at Digital Natives Group, an award-winning agency that worked with a string of clients, including the NFL, I Love New York, and the Nature Conservancy, and many other clients. Currently, Ben teaches digital marketing and consults with a range of thought leaders, venture-backed startups, and other brands. Happy to have you with us, and welcome to the show, Ben.
Thanks for having me, Rob. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to have you here. So let's dive right in. Now, normally I ask how a book finds you, but for you, I'm going to amend it a little bit. How did the topic find you?
Yeah, so you mentioned a little bit of the biographical sketch there. So I ran a marketing agency for 10 years. I started it basically right out of college. It was from an old professor's. He ran an agency and he came to me once and said, I know you kind of want me to start something. We need some help with digital. Maybe we can figure something out. And so we set up shop in their basement, slapped our logo on the wall, and we cut our teeth with like the local ice cream shop and the camera shop and all these little, small clients. Eventually, fast forward 10 years, we're working with some of those brands that you mentioned, like the NFL, I Love New York. And then about 2 years ago, we sold the business. We said, it was a great opportunity and I loved the run of doing it, but it was exciting to explore different things after that. And since then, what I've kind of said is that you can take like the boy out of the marketing agency, but you can't really take the marketing out of the boy, right? The question that people hire an agency to do a lot of times is to get people to care about what you're saying. How do you tell people about what you're doing, and how do you get people to make a choice or to take an action on something? And that question kept on kind of rattling around. And then I would look back at some of the work that we did. I looked back at what worked on me as a consumer, and I looked back, as my experience teaching, and I started to put together kind of the dots here of this common thread between what makes an effective message and what happens to messages that don't work. So the effective ones are simple, and that's all. And that's not particularly like revelatory, but it's what do we mean by simple, and how do we get there? That was really interesting, and that's how we kind of ended up with like a 208-page book about how to say things simply.
Yeah. By the way, I've been to your website, because I was wondering, I wonder if the guy has a simple website. He does. He does. It's very easy to figure out who you are and what you're doing. But it's interesting because you talk about the marketing side of this thing and keeping it simple. I'll give you I'm going to hit you twice on this podcast, by the way, with questions. Don't worry if you get them wrong. But I think there's a lot of connections between sales and marketing. I'm more on the sales side. I'm more on the marketing side. Not that the twains don't meet, but I'm curious how you separate sales from marketing, because so many people go, oh, we have a sales problem. And I'm not so sure. I think it's frequently a marketing problem and vice versa. But it's amazing. I'm talking to CEOs that when I ask them, well, how are you defining the two? They look confused. How do you do it?
Well, I think that there's actually not much separation between the two of them. In many ways, sales is applied marketing and marketing is sales at scale, right?
Okay.
It's the same problem that you're trying to solve in both of them, one with a megaphone and one kind of with an email or a phone call, which is, okay, I have this thing I want people to make a choice about. And if that's to buy something, if that's to donate to somebody, if that's to vote for somebody, how do I say the right words and do the right things to get somebody to be most likely to make that choice. And I don't really draw much of a distinction between the two of them. And I would actually say sales is part of kind of the overall marketing umbrella, which is just about how do you connect producers and consumers, right? Like the fundamental definition of marketing. And I actually go back to that quite a bit when I teach, because I like to talk to my students about the expansive nature of marketing, and that you're not just going to go take the Don Draper job. Like there's a lot of different pieces of the puzzle here. And this is a skill that applies to all of them.
Yeah. Well done, sir. I'm gonna come back. I went to the Ben Gottman School of Simplicity. I'll give it to you simply from my angle, very simply. I think marketing is what what brings somebody to the table, and sales is what happens once we pull the chair out and say, "Take a seat." So when I deal with customers that say we have a sales issue, and I look at their pipeline and there's nothing in there, well, that's not a sales problem. That's a marketing problem. I deal with a customer who says, we have a sales problem and they have a full pipeline of clients that they're not closing. Okay. Now we can have a conversation from the sales side, but that's me simplifying. And Ben, I want you to know something. One of the reasons why we met about a couple months ago or so, that I really wanted to get you on here is I think your topic's fascinating. I'm looking at you and telling you I've spent a career trying to simplify the world of sales, for instance. I think most professional speakers, the one thing they do that makes them professional is rarely it's a new topic, but it's simplifying a topic that others struggle with. So I'm on board.
I appreciate that. That means a lot, especially coming from you. And you mentioned a little bit there and before, my own messaging having to be simple. And so that actually, I joke a lot. I don't recommend anybody else ever writes this book, because you're putting yourself into such a corner where like everything on the book, the cover, the jacket, the back blurb, the quote, all of these things have to be simple. And if I didn't get that right, then you shouldn't believe me, right? And so that ends up being a very kind of funny side effect of this.
Laughing because, whenever we have an economy that struggles, people will look at me and they go, well, what about you? You struggling? No, why would I be struggling? Pandemic. A guy who was tied to airlines and travel and hotels and meetings that aren't taking place. Well, why would I be struggling? But it's the same thing where I go, it's tough when you're the sales trainer and you're trying to make sales. I can imagine it's tough when you're the guy that writes the book on simplicity and you're up there on a stage and somebody's getting confused. So exactly. I think both of us have our work cut out for us. All right, let's stay there. Simply put, Ben, I've never heard a question phrased to you that way. Why do so many of us struggle with communicating effectively? Let's simplify that answer.
Yeah. So I'll go back to like the fundamental like equation of communication here, right? And what is the gulf that happens between kind of a sender and a receiver? And that's the base players in any sort of marketing communication, any sort of sales communication. There's the sender and the receiver, and we're all both of these all the time. Senders, though, it could be an advertiser, it could be an entrepreneur, a manager, a faith leader, an advocate, a parent, a teacher. All of those are senders. Receivers are the buyers, the voters, the donors, et cetera. So, I like to appropriately simplify that because it takes away a lot of the people say, oh, what about this part? What about that? There's the senders and there's the receivers. And when we're a receiver, we are predisposed to something called fluency. And so the word fluency is something that we know in our everyday language, right? We're fluent in English or Spanish or Mandarin. You'd be fluent in, your favorite TV show or cheese or whatever it is. But if you ask a cognitive scientist about the word fluency, well, what that means to them is basically how easy is it for you to take something from out in the world, stick it in your head, and make sense of it. And the easier that is, the less kind of roadblocks and friction and stress that takes, well, the more likely you are to like it, to buy it, to trust it, all the things that you want when we're talking about a sales engagement, a marketing engagement. And the opposite is also true. When something takes a lot of work to get into our head, when it makes us sweat, when it makes kind of the brain cycles turn over and over, we don't like it, we don't trust it, and we don't buy it, the things that we don't want. So we want to be fluent as receivers. We want to get things that are easily perceived, understood, acted upon. But when we're senders, when we have the other hat on, we're pulled in a different direction. We're pulled towards complicated, because internally and externally, it's stuff like an additive bias, where we're more likely to add than subtract when we're faced with a problem. We have a complexity bias to seek out more complicated solutions. And then externally, well, all the forces in our environment start to push us that way too, right? You want more lines in the resume, you want more content on your website, you want more, your FaceTime with the CEO, you want your name in the paper. All these different things are incentivized towards more and more and more complicated in the process. So that's the fundamental rift there, is that we want things to be easy and fluent. When we're senders, we have a really hard time fundamentally and getting there. And so that's the gulf that I try to help us bridge with the rest of the book, which outlines the different kind of design principles about how to get closer.
Right. Do you have, I'm looking for a magic pill a little bit, but, one of as a guy who's, 40-year educator, one thing that Xerox instilled in me was a process, something that was measurable, something that was repeatable and predictable. Are there some measurable process moves that people can make, and stylize, of course, to simplify their message? Because a lot of people struggle here, Ben.
Mm-hmm. And so I'll give you the 5 principles that help us get closer. And it's not necessarily a step-by-step. It's not like a rubric, but they're design principles that help us get there. And within them, there's different tools that we can use. But I'll tell you, so the first one is beneficial. What does it matter to the receiver? What's in it for them? Sales, number one, features versus benefits, right? We don't buy features.
The WIFM, as we call it. What's in it for me? Yep.
And then the second one is focused. Are you trying to say one thing or multiple things at once, right? Is it one idea, or is it 3 ideas in a trench coat? The third is salient. Does your message stand out from the noise? Is it noticeable? Does it rise to your attention? Does it zig when others zag? Is there contrast? That's what we're looking for. The fourth is empathetic. Are you speaking in the language that the audience understands? Are you meeting them where they are in terms of the literal words, as well as their emotions, their motivations? And are you meeting them where they need to be to get to where you want them to be? And then finally, it's minimal. Have you cut out everything that isn't important and left only what is? Are you minimizing not necessarily the words, not necessarily the paragraphs or the pages or the slides, but are you minimizing friction? That's actually what we're looking for when we're talking about minimal. So if you're able to activate on these 5 principles, the more you're able to do that, the more you're able to be fluent, the better you're going to be in terms of your sales message, your marketing message, or anything else that you're trying to say.
Good. And I'll get us both out of jail here. I tell you, I don't have any tattoos, but if I ever had one on me, I think it would be a straight jacket with a circle and a line through it. Because as a trainer, no matter how many times we tell people this is not a straight jacket, it's a process. Mm-hmm. People make decisions, not processes. What Ben's laying out is a guide. We don't have to apply all 5 steps every single time. But it's nice to have that guide to say, need it, don't need it, really need it, don't need it. For instance, of the 5 that really resonated with me just now was focus. And I think that applies to me, because I know when I'm moving quickly, I have a tendency to not quite get to the end at one point and bring in another one, or just find a better way of saying it. And all of a sudden, I've listened to some of my podcasts, which are all wonderful, of course, but because I do magical editing. But when I'm not on my game, I don't quite get the message out before I lose my focus a little bit, and I find a shiny penny in the corner, and I want to say it differently or move to something else. It makes sense in my head. I feel for the audience sometimes when I'm just losing focus.
Oh yeah. And that happens to me, that too. I mean, and I wrote the book on it. I mean, that happens. This is the thing about focus. And this is a a phenomenon that I realize when I look at corporate clients, seasoned executives that have been doing this for, for decades. When I look at my students, they see the same thing. And I see it in my own career. I call it the Frankenstein idea. So if you ever read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, how she describes the monster is not that everything is terrible and gruesome about this creature. It is that, well, the hair is beautiful, lustrous black, and pearly white eyes, and big strong muscles. Every individual piece of Frankenstein was selected to be beautiful, selected to be great. But when you put them together, it was this gruesome composite, right? It was worse than the sum of its parts. And I see this in, let's say, my students. I give them a pitch and I say, hey, here's a brand. The midterm is you have to go out and develop an ad campaign for it, basically, right? And they come back, and without fail, every semester, at least one group is going to be like, well, okay, we're doing X and Y and Z. We have 3 hashtags. We're doing AI, and we have influencers, and we have this thing, we have TikTok and this thing. And it's too diffused. And I'll sit there with the other professionals that I'll bring in to help judge it, and we'll say, there's so many great parts to this. Each individual piece of this campaign was really sharp, but but by putting them together, you made them worse than if you just took one and committed to it. And that happens, again, that happens in classrooms, that happens in boardrooms, is that oftentimes it is better for us, almost 100% of the time, it's better for us to take something that is focused and commit to it rather than throwing everything at the wall.
Uh, First of all, beautifully said. So beautifully said. I promise I won't put it in writing, but I loved that visualization, and I'm quite sure it's going to find itself into some conversation I'm having because it was perfect. I completely welcome. That's why he wrote the book, folks. It's you just took something very complicated and through that visualization really simplified it. How about listening? How about the theories that we speak at one speed and we can listen at another speed, and there's some leapfrogging that goes along there. That I know you can't, we're not controlling necessarily in our message, but it's our audience that's losing focus a little bit. Any thoughts about that?
That's interesting. I think that, I didn't necessarily cover that topic too much in the book because I really wanted this to be kind of the instruction manual for senders, right? We're all both of them. We're receivers most of the time, though. But when we're senders, that's where we really need the help a lot of times. And so the argument that I like to make is, just as you were sending a letter and you had to pay the postage, you are responsible as the sender of any other form of communication to bear the literal and metaphorical cost of that communication. It's your responsibility to make sure that you're meeting them where they are, that you're aligning with their motivations, and that you get across what you want to hear. It's not, we all wake up every day with a lot of things we care about. We care about our friends and our family and our sports teams and our vacation, whatever it's going to be. But we don't care about like your new brand of shampoo, right? That's just not on our to-do list, right? We didn't wake up saying, I got to look at some Instagram ads. I got to open some spam emails. I got to go watch some commercials. Nobody does that. And so it's our responsibility to be as senders, to be humble in the way which we frame this interaction, which is really not an interaction of equals. We are the ones that want something. We're the ones that are trying to get some sort of action. It's our responsibility to make sure we get there. It's not the receiver's responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. As a professional speaker, I'm responsible for those receivers. So, one of the things that I look at is, and I'm listening to you, it's interesting. We've got 2 different authors here, folks, that are kind of coming from a slightly different angle. You're on the words right now, in a sense, and I focus a little, not solely, but I focus on the tune as well, which helps me sell those words a little bit. So, and I think it's a topic we don't talk about a whole lot, which is, well, if we've got people that struggle listening, are we varying our pace? Are we moving our pitch around? Are we utilizing pauses effectively? And that's just on the words part. Obviously, there's some things we can do around the words, but it's a battle out there because I can guarantee you, if we simplify our messages, we're going to be able to hold on to those receivers a lot better. But when we've got them for 6, 8 hours, It's tough. So we've got to pull some other tricks out of our sleeves.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, welcome to the trickster Rob Jollis, because I am I'm all over the place with these. I saw somebody recently actually with not only wanting to engage the audience and obviously get them to speak, but had a was like a rubber ball with that was a microphone, and
Hmm.
you could throw this thing 50 yards in the air. It could bounce, but it was actually a microphone that was being tossed out to the audience. A, we're getting the audience involved. B, we're doing it in a very creative manner. I'm sure it isn't the greatest microphone in the world, and
Yeah.
I'm questioning how many 50-yard punts that thing can take. But these are the tricks of the trade. So simplifying the message, I think, is the most important part. But we have to focus on the tune as well. And
Hmm.
and I think that's why you're the peanut butter and I'm the jelly on this one. You put them together, you got a good sandwich.
Oh
All
yeah.
right. Let's talk. Remember, I said I was going to hit you with two questions that are sales related, but this one I think you have a strong opinion on. I ask this question to audiences quite frequently, and sometimes I'll even tell them, "Get this one right, I'll give you a break," and they still sometimes can't get it right, and so they're really dialed in. Your definition, how do you separate the two?
So I like to say, so features exist in the real world, right?
Hmm.
You have your five senses, you crack them open, you say, I can see, hear, smell, touch, taste this thing. Those are the features. The benefits are, how does my life get better because of those features? And I actually like to break those into kind of two levels of it. I'll call the first one functional and the second one emotional. So the story I like to tell for this would be something like toothpaste, right? So the feature of a mint toothpaste is the flavor, right? The mint flavor. That if you go out and you get a big billboard saying great mint flavor, that's not particularly compelling of an advertisement. You're talking about a feature. It's not why I'm not buying it because it has mint flavor. So you just have to ask yourself the question, so what? And so, okay, well, mint flavor, so what? Well, that means I'll have fresh breath, right? Okay, that's the functional benefit. That's actually getting closer to what I really want with this. Uh, but the trick is you want to keep asking it. You say, okay, so well, okay, fresh breath, so what? Well, that means that I'm going to have a more successful date tonight, right? Okay, well, that starts to get a little bit closer to why I care about mint flavor to begin with. And you can even go another level and say, so what again? Well, I don't really even want the date. What I want is, like your Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I want the love and belonging, or I want the physiological need. Those type of things are what really kind of ultimately push us to action. And so you're able to connect mint flavoring all the way down the line to some of these base motivations, and that puts you in a position to be much more effective in terms of how you're going forward in your messaging. So that I kind of call the like the drill build method, basically. And I use that use the motivation for that, or the inspiration for that rather, for me, was a quote from, I'm sure you may have heard it, Theodore Levitt, a Harvard professor from the 60s. He says, people don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole, right? I don't want the thing, I want what the thing does for me.
Right.
And so if you get that right, everything else is so much easier.
Yeah. There's a wonderful poem, 1941 Sears Sales publication called Don't Sell Me Things. And it is just line after line. Don't sell me shoes, sell me the pleasure of walking on a beautiful day. Don't sell me toys, sell me playthings that make my children happy. And it just goes on and kind of breaks that down that way. Um, I'll shoot you a copy.
Oh, that's great.
uh, but I'll complicate this a little bit more, Mr. Simplify, and tell you that we got a sales audience here. So in the sales world, sometimes we have actually three levels of this. We'll have a feature, we'll have a benefit, but we'll have an advantage as well. And
Mm.
although that sounds complicated, talk about here's a sad little story. Xerox used to have a model that we refer to as the FAB model: features, advantages, and benefits. A dishwashing detergent, which will go nameless, actually had up sued Xerox and said, "Stop using fab in your training and manuals." So we had to get rid of. We call them benefit statements. I was always disappointed because I'm with you. To me, the feature is what are we calling this thing? And maybe it is called, some sort of mint flavor 27, whatever that
Mhm.
manufacturer calls it, but we're not really buying mint flavor 27. Uh, you mentioned what's the benefit? I call that the specific value to the person. This is going to keep your breath clear. But
Mhm.
what if the mint flavor also, what if it you spill it on the top on your counter and it actually will clean up, actually acts as a detergent? In other words, sometimes ideas do have multiple benefits and
Yeah.
it complicates things from the sender and the receiver. So the way we did it at Xerox, we had to get rid of it, but I fiddle with it in my seminars, is I'll still call it an advantage is something nice to know about it. You know, you might not know this, but that mint flavor actually will keep your breath fresher longer than any other flavor we have. You may not know it, but that mint flavor of yours can act as a cleaning detergent. But I'm recommending it. I'm talking about mint because you
Yeah.
told me you wanted a clear breath. And this is specifically what will do it. Now I'll tell you how. And that's how we try and simplify on the sales side of this thing. But it complicates things, Ben, when there are multiple benefits in a sense. And
Mhm.
for me, the stickler on this, I don't believe there are multiple benefits. I think there's one benefit what you wanted it to do, Ben, and then there's a bunch of other things you might not know about that you might like hearing. But I better be careful and make sure which pedal I hit the hardest, which is the one you wanted. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and as you were talking about that, it reminded me of when I talk about positioning, and this is another one of those kind of fundamental marketing exercises you really have to go through to make your life easy. And I will tell you, I have been in client meetings with senior executives. People have worked for 30 years with the same company sometimes, and they couldn't answer like the simple questions that lead into positioning. And so basically all that you're doing in a positioning statement or in the act of doing it is answering three things. Who is your stuff for? What problem do they have that you solve? And then the last one, when you're talking about advantages, why are you better than all the other ways to solve that problem? If you don't know this about your organization or your brand, every time you're going out and you're writing new copy for your website, or you're making a presentation, or you're doing packaging design or whatever, you're reinventing the wheel every single time.
Yeah.
If you do this at the beginning of your kind of brand process, of your messaging process, you will you will be able to set the direction properly. And it makes it takes some time to do this, get all the post-its up on the wall, you get there, but it will make everything else you ever do in marketing easier if you're able to answer those three questions clearly and correctly.
Yep. And I almost jumped out of my chair on one of those because what problem does it solve?
Hmm.
That moves over to our side, the sales side as well. And I've got to tell you, that's simply put, I understand it. Do you know how many salespeople still struggle with that? And rather than focusing on what problem is the client wanting to solve, maybe because I'm going to ask questions and listen, maybe my question should be focused on that problem that they haven't decided whether they want to fix or not, as opposed to me giving you 16 reasons why and solutions and features and benefits to a problem you really haven't committed to fixing. You committed to having a conversation about it, or I wouldn't be here. But I know of a lot of people are listening right now are probably scratching their head going, yeah, that's the conversation I'd have on an annual basis to and walk away with somebody saying, think about it. That like I can't stress enough how important really focusing in on that problem is. Sometimes we don't know. Usually we do. Last thing, and I don't want to talk too much on this, but even when we have a solution, so I'm looking for fresher breath. Good. But I do know what the problem is. You rather than say, here's 6 ways to get it fresh, I'm curious, what sort of challenges have you been having with your breath up to now? Oh, funny you should ask. That's where the
Hmm.
conversation needs to go for both of us.
Oh yeah, and this is one of those things that I tell my students this, for instance, is if you don't remember anything else in your entire degree, if you don't remember anything else from this entire class, if you remember this idea, that sentence about the hole in the drill, you're going to be ahead of almost everybody else in this profession.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because who, who isn't going to find value in being a problem solver? That's what a
Hmm.
consultant does. That's what a problem solver does. By golly, that's what a great salesperson does. I just wish we would focus on that a little bit more, because a lot of times we're focusing on features and benefits, calling it sales training or training, and away they go, walking in and wanting to talk about those features. We earn a right to get to that part of it. All right,
Mhm.
I'm going to be selfish now. I've got the great Ben Gutman with me, and I want to get back to that audience a little bit, because I'm always trying to get my audiences to focus. Stay with me, and I can run around and dance, but that gets old too. So tell me how we can use the concepts that you're writing about to get our audiences to connect with the audiences a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that um if you're keeping these principles in mind, you're going to be more effective in really kind of every venue of communicating. If there's any
Right.
regret I have actually about some of the stuff I wrote in the book, is that I leaned a little bit more in like the first chapter, the introduction, into things like slogans like "Just Do It" and Disney's "Magical Happiest Place on Earth." And there's the reason, is because those are pretty high leverage pieces of communication, right? Like they're very visible, easy examples, people understand them. However, most of the communication we do is not that, right? Most of it is that we're sending emails, we're hopping on the call with somebody, we're writing a blog on our website, or we're maybe doing some packaging design or something like that. And I think that this framework, and these principles are so much more important actually for those environments, just because of the quantity of the communication that goes out with that. And so I encourage folks, if they're looking at this and say, well, I'm not an advertising agent, I'm not an advertising agency, I don't make slogan. This isn't about that. This is about every time which you interact with your audience, how can you be more effective at that?
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that too, because sometimes people will be saying to me, well, I don't really sell for a living. Okay. You're not trying to persuade, influence. You're not trying to take your idea, put it in somebody else's head, and make them feel like they thought of it. I'm sure those skills wouldn't be useful to you. To be able to simplify a message. Ben, before we got on here, I was smiling because I was thinking one of the first books I ever wrote, I paid a lot of money for a publicist, a 6-month campaign. I wasn't that thrilled with the results, and now I understand publicists more and things like that. But I want to tell you something. That publicist did one thing. To your point, publicists came up with a tagline. I'm looking at it right now. Underneath, if you look at any of my branding, it says teaching, entertaining, and inspiring audiences worldwide. Simply put, I have to tell you, I smile and I say, I'm not going to go over the numbers on that 6-month campaign and tell you that that alone made it a worthwhile campaign to me, because I've used it for 15 years now, and that's the value of being able to simplify. The book is simply put, why clear messages win and how to design them. We can get that at Amazon and all kinds of online places and things like that, right?
Yep, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, everywhere books are sold. If you want to check out more, you can go to bengutman.com. There's two T's and two N's. Not a great name for radio, to be honest. But you got to spell the whole thing out. But bengutman.com, you'll see the links to buy the book. You can go download a free chapter if you want over there. I send out an email every Tuesday, and I invite you to sign up for that. And then finally, connect with me on LinkedIn, send me an email. Love to hear, how this has made a difference and how I can help.
Yeah. Yeah. See, Ben Godman thought he was done. That's why he was putting all his information in there, because I
Yeah,
was reminding everybody about the book. I got one more question for you, and then I'll
hit me.
always
That's
make
good.
sure we get people.
Yeah.
But I don't want to bury our lead. The book is online. I'm sorry. The book is, well, on any online store, any place you want to that you get your books. I've looked at it on Amazon. I don't actually accept books from authors that I have on my show, not because I wouldn't like a free book, but because when I really like a book like this one, I want to buy the book. And I want to buy the book because I want to give you a review and I want it to be verified. And so for Podcast Nation out there, the pocket sized pep talk people out there, we all know the drill here, which is get the book, read the book, but write a review on the book. It really means a great deal to the authors, and it means something to me too, because I like to make sure that when people have a home here and are kind enough to give of their time, that we go ahead and support them when we get that book. So we're looking for it on Amazon, any online place. Buy it, put a review on it. But Ben's got a little bit more lifting, and he's done. One more question, because it's towards implementation. And again, selfishly, I'm going to tell you that as a trainer, as a speaker, that in the end, that's how we are. We're judged. I can entertain and inspire audiences worldwide all I want, but if my message doesn't stick, I failed my audience. So, last question: a couple of tools that listeners can immediately put to use and to simplify the way they communicate. So we're talking about implementation. Give everybody who's listening one or two good ideas they can walk away with right now. They'll get the book, walk away with right now, and they're going to improve their ability to communicate simply.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate all the other stuff about the book too. I'll give you two things real quick. First one, interrogate your ands. So remove the word and, swap it out with so, or however, or yet, or be. But so I feel like is the one that is the kind of best replacement a lot of times. Does your message still make sense when you use the word so? And if it does, that's one idea, you're focused. If it doesn't, well, that might not be that focused. The word and has this ability to kind of skip over little gaps in our thinking and in our logic to make us think that things go together. It's kind of like bubblegum and duct tape, putting everything together into a message. But if you interrogate the word and, you replace it with so, then it will kind of throw up those red flags in your brain saying, actually, I'm saying two different things here. It's not one idea. It is those three ideas in a trench coat. So that's number one. Second piece is, and this is something I'm sure you're going to appreciate from your speaking background, is speak to one person, write to one person. There's really no such thing as a crowd. Crowds don't really exist. Every time you've made a decision on a product because you saw a commercial with the Super Bowl, it's not 1 to 100 million. It's kind of 1 to 1. So you're making that decision in your own head. You're at a political rally of 1,000 people. You're not 1,000 people. You're one person that's deciding that the person up on the stage is worth my vote or my donation, whatever it is. So the better you can envision one single person as your audience, the better you're going to be in terms of connecting with them, almost subconsciously, in terms of how you phrase and articulate your message.
Oof, loved it. The first one was good. The second one was great. I love that. Now remember, first one was great for other people. That's why, again, we're not a straitjacket. Different pieces connect different ways. I love what you just said, and I try and remind myself of that. I've got a keynote tomorrow that I'm delivering in Texas, and when I step on that stage, if I'm on my game, they're in my living room, and there's a person there, and I'm having a conversation, and that what Ben just told you is critical, because that's how we get at, we're all looking for it, at the authenticity of our message. I'm not going to be looking at 500 people. I'm going to be focusing on a conversation with one. That was a great reminder for me and anybody who's listening. So nailed it. Thank you. And thank you, Ben, for taking time and being on the show. Really grateful. I knew I was going to love this topic, but you exceeded my expectations. And truly, I'm telling you, you're really onto something here, because if we can communicate simply, I think the world's our oyster. And so I'm hoping people get that book and put a good review on there, and that this message continues to flourish. But I just want to thank you for being on the show. Really grateful.
Thanks so much for having me, Rob. Likewise, this has been a ton of fun, and I'm so happy to be able to share this stuff.
Perfect. Well, he already did it, so I'm going to remind you, he's Ben at bengutman.com, BENGUTTMANN. And now you know what his website is. It's bengutman.com. So either way, you can get a hold of him, jump on, and I can tell you firsthand, if you send him a LinkedIn invitation, he seems to accept. So it all works out. Anyway, thanks so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rob.
We'll do it again as well as we can next time, everyone. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.